Hey everyone, Sam from the Danger Planet here, and today I'm joined by friend of the channel Landon and special guest Maniacal Cackle to talk about Balance-Faux. Maniacal Cackle, just for those who haven't heard of him, is one of the best Malifaux players in the world, I'd say. He made it to all the way to the finals of the last top 16 of the Vassal World Series, where it was a draw in the end. And so, Cackle, can you tell us just a little bit about sort of yourself, your history with the game, and the kinds of stuff you like to play?
Yeah, so I've been playing since the launch of M3E, technically the open beta, and I tend to play card draw crews, and so I tend to really maximize the power of card draw. I do a lot of kind of macro positioning of the wide scale, like getting favorable board states, and I also play a lot of kidnap crews. So those are kind of my specialties, and my weaker areas are like the micro positioning of getting the exact right positioning on every aura and those types of things.
You're definitely a man after my own heart. I love playing card draw. I love kidnaps, and I lost in round 4 of the last Vassal World Series tournament, specifically because I made a half-inch positioning mistake that allowed Parson to get picked off. So RIP on that one.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Cackle, but when the edition first started, you put a ton of reports up on the forums and also did some good tactica write-ups on a couple of the crews you played, right?
Yeah. So the when I first started, Molly was like my absolute biggest master, and still like I love playing her whenever I can. She's got 400, probably 300 or 400 games on her, and played her in the championship of the World Series. Then I followed up with a lot of Riva and Seamus were my next masters, and then I slowly spread out into more Rezzers and then into Neverborn.
Alrighty, and are you playing Neverborn in the next Vassal event?
Yeah, so I'm probably playing either Neverborn or Resurrectionist, but I'm kind of at the point in the game where I can play basically 6 of the factions, and then eventually I'll be able to play all 8 of them pretty effectively, I think.
All right, well, it's really nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on the channel.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So today, we're actually here to talk about not just your long chain of victories, although I'm sure that there's some great stories there, and I've loved watching your battle reports. We're here to talk about Balance-Faux. So for those of you who haven't heard of it, Balance-Faux is a format that has been basically, would you say pioneered or created is the right word? I'm pretty sure you created it, right?
Yes, I'm the one who originally made the format.
So can you tell us what Balance-Faux is?
So in a nutshell, what I noticed is that Wyrd does a really, really fantastic job of balancing errata. And just there's some challenges for them as a company because their new releases are a bit faster than their errata. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a format that's a lot more focused on balance. And so you have taking advantage of the wonderful balance errata that Wyrd does. And so the basic idea of it is that to try to mainly focus on models that have been through a balancing pass of errata. And the end result is we have a format of about 640 models, and that when you play in this format, it feels incredibly balanced. I'd say 80 to 90% of the masters feel viable when you play the format.
So what's currently in the format?
So the format eliminates Madness of Malifaux because, of course, it hasn't been errated yet. And that was the plan, was just to ban new releases. But unfortunately, the last errata, for whatever reason, came much sooner than normal and was much smaller than normal. So from that, I kind of inferred that maybe they hadn't quite done all the errata that they planned to for Malifaux burns. So we also banned the Malifaux burns versatile models, because I think particularly Guildmage and Yannick are problematic. But I also didn't want to say, oh, only these models from other factions are problematic. So I did a batch ban of all the Malifaux burns versatile. That's basically any of the starter boxes except the Explorer Society starter box, and all of the Madness of Malifaux content is banned, and the other 640 cards are allowed.
All right, so just to give some context here, one of the reasons we made this video is that the last non-top 16 Vassal World Series event last year, which was the Teams Cup that Landon and I played together, was played using the Balance-Faux format, although at that point it was a slightly different variant where, because at the time we did that, the Malifaux Burns titles had not gone through the errata cycle yet. They were not allowed. but the Malifaux Burns versatiles were allowed. So this question's for Landon. Landon, was that the first time you had played a full tournament in the Balance-Faux format?
Yeah, that's the first time I'd given it a shot, and honestly, hearing about the format at first, I was a little skeptical, but honestly, having played it afterwards, I thought it was a really enjoyable experience to have done so. I actually played Guild and was the benefit of the Guild Mage nastiness being allowed in the format at that point in time, and I can understand where it might be something that we want to wait and see a little longer on to see if there's any adjustment for that as far as how the format is constructed.
Yeah, so I played in that event too, and I really liked it. That's some of the most fun Malifaux I've had in a while. And so, especially on the heels of Captain Con, where those who were paying attention were aware that Damien went 8-0 across 3 days. There's definitely, I think, some impetus to sort of find different creative solutions to the balance issue. So. Cackle, when did you first come up with the idea of Balance-Faux? How old is the format?
Well, the initial idea came actually before Madness was released, before I even knew Madness was a thing. I had noticed that there was this basic cycle where Wyrd's a very small company. They do a really fantastic job, but there's a little bit of a lag on errata. They tend to release the new content before they errata the old content. And so I always felt like we were in a constant state of the game is almost balanced, but not quite. So that was kind of well into Malifaux Burns, maybe 6 months into Malifaux Burns, I had the idea for the format. And then I thought, oh, it can be an automatically updating format. It'll just run one set behind was the original idea. So that would have been, I think, last year, middle of last year.
So can you tell us a little bit about the process of how you maybe designed and tested and iterated on this? Is this something you did locally? Is it something that was based on conversations with other players? Or is it basically just sort of something you came up with and then decided to test based on sort of pure thought?
So to initially make Balance-Faux, it started as a bunch of conversations between some of the top players in the World Series, and like I just had lots of chats with people where we for instance, initially I was like, oh, let's ban the Madness Burns titles, because back then there was no errata. So we talked through, okay, will this be balanced? Yeah, I think that's a balanced format. That's fine. And then the really big discussion came, and when we really needed testing was when Madness of Malifaux came out. And the errata happened for the wider game with Malifaux Burns. That's when it was really tricky, because then like everyone was saying to me, like Yannick Von Schill and Guildmage Perdita are just going to break this format. Like this game's your format is now garbage because these two masters exist. And so I tried to iterate several different solutions, and eventually I just realized, you know what, the Malifaux Burns versatiles are very, very pushed. None of them got errata, and so I settled on that. There was a lot of pushback back then. Nobody had any better suggestions, so I said, okay, well, that's what I'm posting. That's what I'm defining the format is. Let's start playtesting it. And that's when, we started running playtest games. And so for that, I just find other like-minded folks, and I'm like, okay, let's see if we can construct crews to break the format. And so far, nobody has managed to.
So this is, obviously from the name, this is obviously a format that's directed at creating a balanced experience and maybe targeting just for power level. But do you see, given I think what I would say is the success of Balance-Faux and the popularity of the format, do you see maybe other alternate formats in the future with maybe different goals, like to create fun variants of Malifaux in different ways? Is that something you'd be interested in working on?
Absolutely, because again, so Balance-Faux is a format that is at its best when it's part of a year-long tournament roster, and some of your events are Balance-Faux, some of your events are new content, and there's lots of really cool stuff you could do. And just to give like a hint of one of the next formats I'm thinking of creating, when I look at what breaks the game, card draw and to some degree pass tokens are some of the worst offenders for breaking the game. And I'm thinking of making a format that, for instance, limits you to drawing 2 cards a turn. And that instantly solves Perdita, that solves Damien, that solves Von Schill, that solves so many masters that are really a bit too powerful if you just say, okay, you can't draw more than 2 extra cards per turn. So I think formats like that are definitely worth exploring if this one takes off.
All right. And do you play this format locally with people, or is this mostly a vassal thing?
I absolutely play it on Vassal with my local peeps. At the club, not so much. We consider running tournaments for it, but when people physically buy models, it's a bit harder to ask them not to use them sometimes. But at the same time, we are seriously discussing implementing it a little bit more. And also, when we play casually, most of our games are Balance-Faux by default anyway, because people don't want to be playing the super broken stuff anyway. So like to a large extent, people don't want to be playing these models until they're ratted anyway.
All right, so that actually is an interesting question. Do you feel that a format like this is important because the meta doesn't sort of self-regulate, or do you think that this is the kind of thing that maybe people wouldn't need if the community was more self-regulating about playing powerful things? Or do you think that even if people had this very strong kind of sense of fair play and not wanting to just play the most powerful thing, do you think it would still serve a purpose to have Balance-Faux around?
I think we absolutely do need it, and I think round 3 of the World Championship last year demonstrated it, where Trick and I had both secured our placement in the top 8, so the outcome of the game didn't matter. But basically, he was in a position where he wanted to play something other than Perdita, but he knew he would instantly lose the game if he declared anything into Perdita, and other than Perdita, and I declared Yanlo. And I was like, well, I don't want to play Yanlo, but I know that if I don't declare Yanlo, I instantly lose to Perdita, which was just a really rough spot. So I find that when you don't play Balance-Faux at those top tables, you often get in a position where both players end up playing something they don't want to because they're worried they will lose to the strong stuff otherwise. Whereas what Balance-Faux does is it allows you to form an agreement of, okay, we're going to take the strong stuff off the table, and now let's just have a nice balanced game.
And Landon, has that been kind of your experience as well? Just you feel that things are opening up more when you play this format?
Yeah, for certain. I mean, I was looking at lists I would have never gotten to put together in another format. I know I was looking at some silly list where I could just play Perdita and toss things with a Guardian, right? And I'm talking Perdita 1 here, and that's not even a name you hear normally in like the context of Malifaux.
Yeah, definitely true.
Whenever you hear Perdita, they're like, yeah, it's Perdita 2, right? And Guardians, I don't even know if they was hired in regular Hoffman lists.
So Cackle, when you first came up with this idea, this sort of like something's going on with balance, what can we do to adjust it? Was this your first sort of take on how to create a more balanced format, or did you go through some iteration first before you landed on what we would call modern Balance-Faux?
I probably threw like a dozen ideas in the bin. I don't and most of your initial ideas are going to be like, oh, could we do a specific ban list? Because that feels a lot cleaner in a lot of ways. But at the same time, since I was just one person, I wasn't doing this as part of the World Series or anything. Since I was doing this one person, I felt like there was no ban list I could make that was going to feel fair to everyone. And so I really, really wanted the format to feel like it was fair. And so that's why eventually I ended up saying, you know what, if the problem is mostly the new content, let's find a way to focus on the new content.
Right. And so do you feel, kind of following up on that question, do you feel that this is sort of the ideal solution to balance issues, or do you feel like this is sort of the solution that is available to us given maybe our resources as players, but given your druthers, you might try something else?
Well, I think there's two better solutions. So the first best solution, it's just trumps everything else, is that Wyrd suddenly finds themselves with lots more money and they can hire more staff and they can do more errata. Like, that's the dream. But of course, that's not the reality. Wyrd doesn't have unlimited resources and they can't do infinite errata. So failing that, maybe if you had a large group, and I think the Malifaux World Series Committee is probably an example of this, I think that they kind of have the pull with the wider community that they could form a specific ban list. And so maybe that's viable, but outside of a really massive project to form a really perfect ban list, Balance-Faux was like the best thing I could come up with that is kind of viable. And because the other problem is with the ban list is you have to constantly be tinkering of being like, oh, now this master's too powerful. Whereas Balance-Faux focused on, okay, let's do a batch removal, and just the end product needed to be a balanced format, and that's what we got. And so I think the end product is really, really good, even if it looks a bit clunky on the outside.
So, as we said in the last event, and Landon alluded to this, the Malifaux Burns of Versatiles were allowed, but titles were not. So, since then you've changed it. So, is this a format that you see as kind of a living format that changes based on kind of observations and player feedback? Is that the goal?
Absolutely. This format was originally designed that it would automatically update every errata and release cycle, with basically the idea being every time something goes through an errata, it's allowed into the format. And that will probably be the plan going forward if these Malifaux Burns versatiles get errated. So the idea would be that eventually it'll just ban whatever the new format is once the older formats are errated. But there'll probably be a little bit of judgment calls because the errata process doesn't always catch everything. So yeah, there will have to be a little bit of judgment when there's one or two outliers.
All right. So here's a question. Now, the Malifaux burn stuff, I think we can agree, there's maybe some balance concerns, but it's also the sort of the exciting content, the content that really gets people worked up. So sort of what is your response to people who might say like, well, this format's just, I don't like this format because people can't play with the cool new toys that they've got. Like they can't play with the models that, like Tull and Tiri that have been previewed and that they're been looking forward to for months.
Yeah, so with Madness of Malifaux, there absolutely is that excitement. I understand that's one of the downsides of the format. So there's two things there. Is first off, Balance-Faux is designed as a format that you don't have to use every single game. So for instance, the Malifaux World Series is doing 5 events this year, and I think if 2 or 3 of them were Balance-Faux and 2 or 3 of them were Madness, you would have a really, really good roster for the year. So it's meant as one format that you can combine with other formats. And I think that solves that issue. The other thing is, it is definitely aimed at people like myself, where I play, 100 to 200 games a year, where my meta plays very, very aggressively, where these masters get solved very, very quickly. And so as a good example of Damien has only been out for about 6 months. We can probably expect he won't get another errata maybe till the end of this year or maybe till next year. And yet we already know that he's super, super busted. And before too long, it's very easy to get sick of the new masters long before they're errated. So I think what you can do is when the next expansion releases, probably play a bit of not Balance-Faux for a while. And then after 3 or 4 months, people might get sick of it. And then you start introducing some Balance-Faux events again.
Yeah, and I think we're in to a certain extent a unique situation here, because Damien's been out for much longer than the rest of Madness, and he's also probably the most problematic thing balance-wise in Madness, although not the only problem in Madness. And I think that you could quibble about that a bit. And Harrison's very strong, but so the fact that maybe the first release from Madness was also the one that happens to be just like a fairly uncontroversially best master in the game is, definitely I think a contributing factor. But so have you heard like feedback on Balance-Faux from people besides Landon and I who have tried it? And what's the feedback you've been getting?
So the feedback with Balance-Faux is almost universal. When people hear about Balance-Faux, they hate it, and when they play Balance-Faux, they love it. And that's almost entirely consistent across the board. It's very, very popular by people who actually stop and give it a go. And I think the reason for that is like what we want to do in Malifaux is we want to play all the awesome stuff. Wyrd is just the design of Wyrd models are ridiculously good. They are ridiculously cool. And what Balance-Faux does is it lets you say, okay, I've played the Madness stuff. I'm happy with the Madness stuff. Now I'm going to go try to play the other 80 to 90% of the content of the game. And it gives you access to playing all the rest of that content without getting auto-stopped by like Damien.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Now this question's for Landon. Landon, as somebody who has, you play at a very high level, you have taken pretty much every game off me that you've played. Do you find that when you're playing Balance-Faux, it is more testing to you as a player, because you have to sort of make do with less, or do you feel that it's a little bit easier for you just because you don't have to worry about the sort of biggest boogeymen of the format?
So the thing about Balance-Faux is that, firstly, I feel like it captures a lot of the actual feel of physical Malifaux if you're playing it on Vassal, in the sense that there's a much more limited pool of things that people can play based simply on availability, as not everybody owns every model in the game at your locals, right? So cutting out all the new stuff that at this point in time we would have to proxy gives it a bit more of an authentic feel. But to answer more directly your question, I would say that it's perhaps more testing on the initial declare phase, just because you have less of an idea of what your opponent's going to play. When you're playing at high level Malifaux, you normally can kind of guess and check based on what's the best thing at this, right? And if that's not always available because the best thing is something that's new, then you have to account for a lot more possibilities during declarations. But I find that to be more interesting than less. That makes sense. But once you're playing the actual game, it's still Malifaux, right? So I don't know if it's more challenging in that regard.
Okay. Yeah, that's been my experience as well. It feels more open. And the last Balance-Faux event I was at, I was playing Bayou, which I hadn't done in quite a while. And so I stuck basically with Ma and Zip just because those are the masters that got the most reps in, and it was comfort food for me. But especially after playing Bayou at Captain Con, I feel like, there's a lot more Bayou masters that I'd want to try out. And I really feel like I couldn't try out if it wasn't Balance-Faux. So that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to, is just more events where I'm allowed to play a broader spectrum of masters. So Cackle, you've got this format. It's pretty popular, I'd say. Obviously we here on this channel are, you're in a friendly room right now, and I know there are people who have had negative reactions to it, but do you feel like this is sort of a work in progress? Are you continuing to refine the format? And if so, can you tell us sort of what your thoughts are about what's maybe next for it?
I think the refining for the format will largely be when new content is released, when new errata is released. I think we've got a pretty good formula. I'm definitely open to the idea of maybe we're going to discover something new, something busted within the format, and we're going to have to adjust. But so far, I've seen some really good players try to break the format and fail. And that's really the goal that you want. You want it to be at the point where if everybody's trying their best to break the format, they can't find something that just automatically beats everything else.
I was curious if the nature of physical releases had any sort of impact on your decision to make Balance-Faux, or if this was strictly something you thought of in the context of Vassal.
Oh, that's a great question.
It was for all my games, both on Vassal and off. But yeah, the physical releases don't come into it. I have a very proxy friendly meta. And so for me, the core thing was just that when you're playing 100 or 200 games a year, and I totally acknowledge many players do not play enough games to get sick of Damien or to get perfected with Damien. But for those of us who do play that many games, it can be really, you just really, really feel the balance issues in Malifaux. Even though the game's 90% good, you really feel that last 10%. And so it entirely aimed at just addressing that balance issue and nothing to do with physical releases.
Yeah, I've played against Damien twice and I'm sick of him. So
yeah.
So one of the things I want to emphasize with Balance-Faux is that you can make it compatible with lots of other formats. So for instance, you can have Balance-Faux Iron Scorpius. You can have Balance-Faux plus the bands format. You can have Balance-Faux GG-All, which, by the way, Balance-Faux GG-All is the most fun I have ever had playing Malifaux. It is so much fun because the depth of the strategies is such, combined with the balance of Balance-Faux, means that literally at 50 plus masters in the game are going to see table time, which is why I want to play Malifaux. It has so much variety, and you get to experience all that variety in just one event. It's absolutely
I'll say this: your passion for GG-All is why the Danger Planet Narrative League is being run in GG-All. Except I'm doing a slight variant. It's GG-All minus Runic Binding.
Oh, yeah, and one thing I should say about GG-All is you should always get your TOs curating the list. And actually, one of the big things I would like to add to my contributions to these formats is I would really like to make a GG-All that is takes all the good stuff, right? Because there's a lot of stuff in GG All that's kind of redundant, that is new iterations of old schemes or new iterations of strategies. And I would kind of just polish that up to be like, okay, here's like 10 strategies and like 20, 25 schemes, and here's the pool that I think is good.
And to be honest, that's kind of how we did it a lot in late M2E for events. I don't know how much M2E you guys actually played, but after we went through so many gaining grounds, we very frequently would start going back and running some of the old strategies that people liked when setting up events. So it's not entirely new ground.
Yeah, I played a little bit of 2E at the end, but not very competitively. So, because there wasn't really a competitive community where I was at. So, I wasn't like whenever you tell these stories about like people blowing up the whole table with like Nicodem or the Vix, I'm like my meta was like playing Asami and stuff because I don't know. I don't know what a good master looks like in GG2.
No, that's entirely fair. But yeah, I think eventually I would love to see more tournaments start running these GG All events. But to your point, they definitely are something that historically had been curated and would definitely need to continue to be curated.
Yeah, I mean, runic binding is kind of a meme, but I think there's definitely some changes I'd make. And so, and Cackle, given your sort of your love of GG All for communities that maybe don't quite feel ready to jump on the train of Balance-Faux, who maybe are like we want to play with our models. Maybe we have newer players who only have some of the newer crews and don't want to be unable to play the game. Do you feel like GG All is like a reasonable step towards balance, or do you have any other suggestions for people who maybe want a format that's a little more balanced but aren't ready to go all the way into Balance-Faux?
I think GG All is a really good stepping stone, and the reason for that is that you can make so many different pools that it is possible to make a pool where you think, okay, Damien is not actually the best pick into this, which is really, really fantastic. But I do have one word of warning about GG All, which is that new players can sometimes find it a bit overwhelming. The nice thing about GG3 is there's 4 strategies, 13 schemes. That's already a lot to learn. So one of my recommendations for TOs for a 5-round tournament, if you're wanting it to be new player friendly, is you do 4 rounds of GG3 and 1 round of GG All. And then over time, your community will learn more and more stuff and you can introduce more and more. I do just want to give another shout out to Wyrd, because the reason I made the Balance-Faux format is because I love Malifaux so much. Like, some people have joked that I'm the most active player on the planet, and some weeks it's probably true. The amount of time I spend on the Discords, etc., is so much. And the reason I made Balance-Faux is I'm so passionate about Malifaux. I really, really want people to be able to have a nice competitive experience, and so I feel like Balance-Faux is something I'm trying to contribute to the community of, like, when you feel like I do and that you want to be able to experience something that's a little bit more balanced than the default, this is a good option for people
here. So Cackle, thanks for coming on. Do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Just thanks so much for having me on. You folks have a really great show, and thanks to everyone who has helped with the Balance-Faux format and everyone who's giving it a try. I know that it sounds a little bit weird, but I'm really stoked to hear all the positive feedback from the people who are trying it.
Well, you'll definitely be getting that from me. I'm a big fan. Landon, any final thoughts?
No, not really, honestly.
No, that's fine.
Look forward to the next Balance-Faux event.
Yeah. And so for anyone who, if you like this video, please give us a like. You can subscribe for more great Malifaux content. And there's a link in our description to our Discord server. At our server, we talk all about Malifaux. We talk about different miniature games if you like them. We talk about, different formats we like. So we'd love to have you there. But until next time, thanks for dropping by the Danger Planet.